Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, 2025. It's almost 10:40. And we're delighted to have with us the Secretary of the Administration. So nice to call you that, Sarah Clark, who's here to talk to us sort of the whole notion of responding to changes in the federal government. We're seeing all kinds of different things happening. And I know that Madam Secretary, you are spending a lot of time thinking about this, so we need to also. Yes. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's pretty informal, I think, but great to have you here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate being invited to testify and appreciate that it's more of a dialogue, because I think it's important that we all understand what's happening at the federal level. And as part of that, understanding that it seems to continuously shift, as I'm sure you've experienced the same as I over the last couple of weeks. And so the approach that the state administration is taking is really to carefully assess and monitor what is happening at the federal level, working to understand the facts, and not just reacting as various directives or edicts are issued from the federal government. Because we've seen over the last couple of weeks, for example, when OMB issued an order essentially stopping, pausing funding from all federal agencies, and very shortly that order was rescinded. And so it's important to understand what's happening, but also being measured in our response and understanding what the actual facts are and how it will impact Vermont before we react, which I think can be probably hard for all of us to do. But it's important that we save our energy so that we're able to focus on the priorities that are really important to Vermont and Vermonters, understanding that the federal government is our largest funding partner, and obviously play a really critical role in the important programs that we administer here in Vermont. So we are tracking about 45 executive orders that have been issued. I'm sure you've read about them, and they're many of them on the White House website. And so we are tracking them, working with various partners, whether it's national organizations or our own research and reconnaissance, to understand what those impacts will have. The departments and agencies of state government are providing, as they receive information from their federal funding partners, they are providing those updates to us on the fifth floor so that we can track and understand them before we react, if you will, because as we've seen, things do change sometimes quickly at the federal level. In a lot of ways, and it's not the right analogy, but from my office, we have kind of compared this to a federal shutdown. If you recall, we've been through several of those over time. And so I issued guidance from my office across state government to ensure that all agencies and departments are up to date on all of their federal draws, which is the guidance that we normally issue if we're facing a federal shutdown, essentially to make sure that we are drawing in all federal cash that's allowable into our state coffers, so that we're in the best position to move forward if things change suddenly. And so that's the guidance that has been issued. It's pretty standard protocol. That's what departments and agencies, that's what their job is to make sure that they're timely in all their federal draws. But I think it's important to issue that reminder to our departments and agencies so that they're doing that in a timely manner in accordance with our policy.
And so is most of your work, is it mostly reimbursable? So you pay it out first and then get money back?
I think in large part, but it really does depend upon the federal program, but in large part. And, I thought it would be interesting for this committee to understand, like, one of our largest agencies as it relates to federal funds and all things is the Agency of Human Services.
Right.
And so they, of course, have a pretty, I think, sophisticated mechanism for how they handle federal dollars. And they, just to give you a point of reference, they draw down roughly $110 million a month. So $110 million a month across a variety of programs, most notably the Medicaid program. But they are up to date and in compliance with their policies and state policies, but wanting to give you kind of a point of reference for the dollar amount that we're talking about on a monthly basis. The Agency of Human Services, I think, being the largest recipient of federal dollars in state government, not the only, but the largest.
Right, because that's over a billion.
Yes, yeah, it's a lot of money. The other thing, there's been various news articles about organizations losing access to the federal payment management system, which is the system where most programs draw down federal dollars. And so we're also tracking access issues. When I think an example that was in the paper, the Head Start programs, or a few Head Start programs in Vermont, that they did eventually receive their funding from the federal government, but I think it was delayed. And so it was causing some cash flow considerations. And so that's an example where the Agency of Human Services was in close communication with those organizations. And ultimately, the federal reimbursement did come in. But it's those issues that we're tracking at the Agency of Human Services. This is as of last week, but they have access to all of their federal reimbursement systems, if you will. And so we're trying to both monitor that we're on top of drawing down federal dollars, but making sure we have access to those systems.
Question, Member Bush?
So they were locked out of the system for a while and were allowed back in? Is that how that worked?
For Head Start, I'm not an expert in this area. I think they had actually anticipated payment that was several days late and that eventually occurred in that circumstance.
So were there any systems that across state government that they were locked out and then got permission back? And
Yeah, I think there have been a few systems that access, like right when OMB initially issued that guidance on federal dollars, pausing federal dollars, I believe some systems had technical issues and agencies were temporarily unable to access. I think they were couched as technical issues. And access has subsequently been restored. And I'm not aware of any issues as of right now in terms of access to systems.
Representative, did you have a question?
Sure. So just a couple of quick questions. So typical access to whatever system you're tapping into to draw money down. So AHS or any other agencies or departments here. So you make the request to draw down. There's a time period, I suspect, in which then the state receives that drawdown. What's typical? I'm asking that question just in the event, things are changing perhaps on a given day.
Yeah.
Between the request to draw down versus actually receiving.
Yeah. I think, again, it does depend on the program, but in the case of the Agency of Human Services, I think the timing of the receipt of the cash is pretty closely aligned with when they do the drawdown. I think some programs can take longer because there's, reporting that has to be filed associated with the drawdown. But there are legal requirements by both the state and federal government that should be in compliance with.
Yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, good question. Right.
Monies to
Yeah.
continue to lay out for
Yeah.
citizens here in Vermont.
Yeah. Nope. It's an important question. I think the other thing that we're tracking at the national level, not necessarily within the executive branch, but what's happening in US Congress. I think in both in the House and Senate, where some key committees in the House, for example, have been given savings targets. And so, this is kind of late breaking information, but they've been given some savings targets that will impact programs in Vermont, most notably Medicaid. I'm sure you've heard of this as well in terms of the federal government considering changes to our Medicaid program, which will really impact all states if they have to come from savings within the Medicaid program. And so that's something that we are also closely monitoring. That's not an executive order related, but it is at that kind of national level that will have significant impact on all states if they reduce funding.
Or this may be premature to know, but when you say target reductions in Medicaid, are you talking about the optional services that states can offer? Or are you talking about, across the board rate reductions, for the federal match? Any intel or insight there?
So it really is, I'd say more kind of late breaking at the end of last week. And so don't necessarily have like a clear path for what they're going to contemplate, but it could be things like implementing work requirements in the Medicaid program. It could be looking at optional services. It could be looking at the federal medical assistance percentage, FMAP, which is, the FMAP is the rate at which the federal government matches states on our Medicaid spending. So it's important to understand that none of this has happened yet, but when you talk about significant impact on states, these are the things that we should all be monitoring together as we move forward.
And you're talking about through the budgeting process in Washington.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah, it's part, I think, of the House continuing resolution that they're debating now, if you will.
Right, and we heard from Nolan that 1% in FMAP is $18 million.
Yeah.
5%.
Yeah,
So it's
it adds up quickly. Mhm.
good.
So, kind of connected to the financial stuff, but, some of us were shared a memo from the, school boards associations where the federal administration was making rulings about, in particular, they were removing some categories, some classes from the federal discrimination classes, including transgender individuals. And the School Boards Association issued and then retracted a memo that basically said that we are following the federal, we have to follow the federal rules because they're giving us money in the face of our state discrimination practices, which have always been much more expansive than the federal. So that memo was retracted. I don't know whether that means that the Agency of Education is going to act with the fear of having those federal funds removed or not. But can you comment on how the state's going to approach the differences between the connections, the sticks, if you will, of taking federal money, which we do because we have to, versus how what we consider legal practices that the federal government is now trying to say are not acceptable?
So I'm not familiar with the specific letter, though I did read the news article that you referenced, but I think in general, and I'll just circle back to my opening remarks, our approach is to really work to understand the facts of what's happening at the federal level before reacting. And I think part of that is understanding our grant agreements with the federal government, understanding that they're issuing some pretty broad executive orders that on the surface, try to make things clear, but I think it gets a lot more complex when you go underneath the surface in terms of the impact on Vermont. And so looking at our specific grant agreements with the federal government and understanding what it's asking before we react. I think in Vermont as a state, we would probably all agree that our core values are diversity, equity, and inclusion, regardless of what the federal government tells us. And you can see that in some of the investments that we've collectively made with state dollars over the last several years, and that we have no plan to alter from that as a core value for the state of Vermont.
What may?
Understanding limitations of our ability to replace federal dollars if in fact at some point federal dollars are in jeopardy. And so I think you're hitting on a really critical area that we've had some conversations about, but it's not really clear yet what those executive orders mean and the impact on them. In carrying out the core mission, the core goals of some of the programs that we do on behalf of the federal government. So we want to understand the facts before we react to it. Also knowing we have invested state dollars in these same programs. The Office of Racial Equity, for example, is an office that was created, I think, really in collaboration, the executive and legislative branches, that is funded for the most part all with state dollars.
And I appreciate that. I just, with the threats that unless, I don't want to say trust and assume, because I know it's a lot of work, but I imagine the job at the administration level is to understand those grant programs and to say, well, if Medicaid is cut by this many hundreds of millions of dollars, What does that mean in the immediate? So it sounds like it's really all hands on deck to try to understand what may happen at any given moment.
It is, it really is. And it does change, as you know, moment by moment, but just being measured so that we react appropriately when needed, but not when it's not needed yet. And so, because I think it is our job to run state government. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that as effectively as possible and kind of minimizing the chaos, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lily.
Yeah, I appreciate a measured approach just because everything is changing every minute. I am assuming that you're working collaboratively with other states, state administrations to compare notes, but also to perhaps advocate together against potential cuts that you described.
Yeah, that is correct. We are working with other states and other national partners, if you will, to understand what's happening at the federal level and understanding the impact on all of the states. So we can work together. Because, you know, if Medicaid is changed, that will impact every state.
Yes. Yeah. I'm also wondering, Sarah, I'm sorry, interrupting your remarks here, but so we've already seen there have been impacts related to USAID that affect Vermonters.
Mhm.
The director of USDA Rural Development for New Hampshire, Vermont was terminated last week. And as other people in that office, we use them extensively through Commerce and Community Development and the RDCs. So these sort of peripheral things are also impacting state government in certain ways. And I'm wondering how you're sort of thinking about those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything does continue to shift, and you list two really big examples of where we're seeing changes in federal staffing that will eventually and probably now impact Vermont in some way. And so I think it's part of what we're assessing and monitoring to understand how that will impact our day-to-day operations if, you know, federal staffing is changed in such a way that our ongoing daily operations are impacted.
So, Jim.
You may not know the answer to this, but do we have any idea how many federal workers live in Vermont that work remotely, like to an office in Washington? I know from personal experience, my daughter who works in Washington has lost a couple of employees because they are remote from other states and they can't transition to in person, you know, this week, next week, whatever that deadline is.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure someone knows the answer. I think it would be an interesting one to follow up on.
I thought I read somewhere that we have something like, it's either 7,500 or 17,500, and it might be the higher number that work in Vermont. It's not all remote, but they may work for Border Patrol, they may work
Right.
for the
Court
US
system,
Chamber.
yeah.
You know, there's a whole lot of,
Yeah.
it was a bigger number than I
Yeah.
expected it
Yeah.
to be at the federal level,
Right.
but I don't have the other.
No,
figure.
I guess I wouldn't expect you to know, but it is part of the impact. I mean, that's one of the things.
Yeah.
And since the pandemic, come to Vermont, you can work from, I mean, you can live in a national park and work remotely to your job
Yeah.
on Wall Street or wherever you were working, so.
And it's probably too soon for me to say this, but one of the kind of informal conversations we've had is if we do have workers in Vermont that are not able to continue with their federal employment, will it help us with some of our workforce challenges, you know, in state government or more broadly? There could be, and so that's like one of the things with all the action at the federal level is making sure we understand the facts, but some of it may actually benefit Vermont and wanting to really understand before we just react.
Our ability to be nimble. We're gonna
Correct.
have to react, but if we can react nimbly.
Yes.
Things like those opportunities.
Yes.
Then we're gonna be in better shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good question.
I can just imagine too, there's an interruption, just in straight communication.
Mhm.
Someone at the federal level that you're, either you or anyone else. in the
Yeah.
State is in constant, regular communication with whatever it may be
Yeah.
here. That alone could, that's the kind of thing I talk to.
Yeah, and I think, because we have definitely across state government been having those communications with our federal partners, and I think depending on which agency that federal partner works for, there could be not the greatest circumstances that they're facing on a federal level. And so I think it's important that we maintain communications and understand where our federal partners are coming from and what may be changing for them.
So I wonder, Sarah, we know that we don't know a lot, right?
Yeah.
Things can happen anytime, but I'm wondering if you're talking to agency secretaries and, pick a couple of like possible what if scenarios.
Yeah.
Think about how you would change your budget if in fact FMAP goes away, or, there's too many to name, but are you helping them? Are they thinking about those things?
Yeah, they definitely are. And we are having those conversations so that we can kind of collectively stay on top of what may be shifting at the federal level. And, this morning, I'm here talking to you now about Medicaid, but that's follow up to a conversation with Secretary Samuelson. And so we are making sure we are communicating as a cabinet so that we can have the best collective information.
Well, I'm just wondering, since you used to staff this committee,
Yeah.
do you have any advice for
That's a great
in terms
question.
of developing a budget, given all the uncertainties?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, part of the communication that has happened at some level and should continue to happen is, I think, with my team and the Joint Fiscal Office, as you navigate this, so that we're sharing information as real time as we can, so that they're informed to be able to inform you. I think as we look to the future and federal uncertainty, making sure that we're reserving as many dollars as we can to help mitigate potential impacts. We don't want to be overreactive, but when we can be measured in terms of making a spending decision now versus later, maybe choosing the later, assuming that further down the timeline, we have more concrete information to inform our decisions. Don't want to be overreactive, but we should just be thinking about what may be coming our way.
And
That's a great question.
good question. And the good news is our reserves are in good shape.
Yes.
We're statutorily at the cap with everything except the rainy day reserve, which we created on our own. It's not a
Right.
requirement.
Yeah.
And we're close to the cap on that one.
Yeah.
So we are certainly paying attention to that, but I think that's a good thinking to, can it wait a year? Can it wait
Yeah.
whatever before we do some of these things that.
Yeah, and we have a strong cash position, as you know, I'm sure you've talked to the treasurer recently as well. That helps mitigate short-term impacts.
Right. But we don't have a savings account of 3.1 billion to backfill all
Not.
federal funds. that we-
We do not.
No.
Shop.
And 3D printers, maybe that'd be even better.
I think another example, the governor established a decision support team related to looking at tariffs. It's a multi-agency effort to really try to understand what's happening at the federal level. Though that obviously keeps shifting with, 30-day extensions for both Mexico and Canada. But that team across ACCD, public service, agriculture, I think I'm missing one agency, but understanding like what would the impact of those tariffs be, doing the modeling. Maybe there are opportunities if tariffs are raised with our trading partners, but an example of trying to understand the impact as things continue to shift.
So it seems like sort of that's one of the big ones. And the other big one, obviously, is the whole Medicaid and human services. Those are kind of our two.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think, if you look at the executive orders, there's like the green energy, those types of investments and some of the statements that have been made about that maybe pivoting from what was in the IJA and the IRA, those federal bills. Yeah, and so we're transportation, exactly. And so we, staying on top of a lot, which is hard, but it all continues to shift. So, which I think is intentional.
Yes.
So
Any other questions from the committee?
committed to communicating with you as much as it's possible and as much as there's useful information to share.
We appreciate that. I know that you're in contact with JFO and obviously they're here a lot.
Yes, they are.
So yes, yeah, it's going to require a team across all bodies to make this as palatable as we can make it. And thank you for all you're doing. We appreciate you coming in and talking to us.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's always good to come back to this committee.
Anytime.
Wonderful.
She
Appreciate that.
She was our Emily Byrne for 2 years.
Spent a lot of time over there.
That's right. That's right. So, anyway, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you.
Thank you.
Take care, sir. Thank you. So next up, we have a delightful hour of 4 of our councils and orchestras and things like that. So the humanities, Council of the Humanities, come on up, Chris. Chris or Christopher?
Christopher, thanks.
Christopher, okay. And I think this is your first time in our committee this year.
Yes.
So we do have a bunch of new members, so we can practice our introductions again. It's been a little while. Dave?
Good morning. I'm Dave Iacoboni from Morrisville, and I represent the Lamoille, Washington District. Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. John Kosenska from Burke, and I represent the Essex Caledonia District.
Stevens from Waterbury, representing the Washington Chittenden District.
This is Jim Harrison from Chittenden, the town. Robin Shy from Middlebury.
Amy from Burlington, and I apologize to leave for a meeting.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill and Jericho.
I'm Wayne LaRush. I represent Hugate, Franklin, Richford, and Berkshire.
Morning, I'm Mike Merwicki, and I am from Wyndham 4 District, Putney and Cumberland.
Lynn Dickinson, I represent St. Albans Town, and I too have to leave.
Lots of people coming and going.
Okay, thank you.
We will miss you, but we know your support, so thank you. I will try and keep it brief because I know we only have an hour for all 4 of us.
Yeah.
Looking at the clock. I wish I could say that we will be entirely joyful, but we are facing the exact same things that Sarah just described for many of us. So I just want to echo her. All of those concerns affect us as well. Vermont Humanities is about 42% federally funded right now. And our expectation is that we need to pay very, very close attention to what's happening in Washington. Again, my name is Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup. I'm the Executive Director at Vermont Humanities. Always a delight to come to this committee. We are the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities in Washington, D.C., as well as the Library of Congress. So we actually interact with 2 different branches of government in D.C. Times are uncertain, of course. We remain grateful for all of you and for the state of Vermont for supporting the organization year over year. We're 50 years old, 51 years old this year. And the legislature has supported us for many, many years, actually going back to the Cunin administration. Cultural organizations are frequently asked about their economic impact. So I brought just a couple of numbers from Americans for the Arts, which I probably our friends at the Arts Council will also talk about. There's about $160 million in change in cultural spending that happened in Vermont the last time they surveyed. It's supported about 2,700 jobs in the state of Vermont, including 12 at my organization.
Somebody's got to
we were able to offer, in partnership with USDA Rural Development, free access to business training programs for artists through the Assets for Artists program. And we had 76 artists participate, and they overwhelmingly told us how valuable this service was to them. You know, I mentioned that we only fund 45% of the grants that we receive. We know that in order for the creative sector to thrive, we really need artists and arts organizations to have the training and skills that they need to run their businesses as well. Christopher mentioned this in his comments as well, and I'll say that another area of focus for us over the past few years has been emergency response and emergency preparedness. And we know this issue will continue to be vital throughout our state in the future. So the Vermont Arts Council are co-leads of VACDARN, a great organization with a terrible acronym, the Vermont Arts and Culture Disaster and Resiliency Network. We co-lead this along with the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration Office in the Secretary of State's office. And VACDARN is working to build the strength and resilience of Vermont's vital creative sector, cultural sector, and offers trainings, support, and direct assistance. So through the network, artists and cultural organizations work together to share experiences and resources, mobilize support for mutual assistance, and engage collectively with first responders and government emergency management agencies. So as you would imagine, right, if there's an emergency, the last thing you want is every artist in the state calling Vermont Emergency Management and asking questions all over the place. We know people have questions, and the role of VACDARN is really to be the clearinghouse for that information in the times of an emergency. We've also been able to provide a lot of training and resources to help with emergency preparedness, right? The better you are in an emergency means you were more prepared ahead of time. So this focus on emergency preparedness is something we're really continuing to do in the coming years. We've now had to do this 2 summers in a row in response to massive flooding. And I'll also mention that our offices on State Street, right across the street, were flooded in 2023 and are still not occupiable. And that's been the only home of the Arts Council since we were opened in 1965. So the budget itself, the Vermont Arts, the good stuff. The Vermont Arts Council is actually the only state arts agency in the country that operates as an independent nonprofit. We're a quasi-state agency. We were founded in statute in 1965. It's our 60th birthday this year. And the council receives the majority of its revenue from 2 sources, the National Endowment for the Arts and the state of Vermont. The NEA requires that state governments match the federal dollars allocated to state arts agencies dollar for dollar, and our general fund out of the general fund. And our general fund allocation, therefore, enables us to secure substantial federal funds that are distributed across the state. You've heard a lot in this committee, just by walking around in the world, that there is a lot in the air right now about federal funding. I'll say that 6 weeks ago, we were advised by our NEA partners that the amount that we would be receiving this year is $1,071,800. We are moving forward as if that is the case, and that will require a state match of that same amount. When any dollar that is not matched is a federal dollar that we don't get, meaning that it's really double the impact for Vermonters. We're currently in the governor's budget for $1,003,000, which was 3% over last year's amount. And we're requesting that we match the full amount. I do want to be very transparent about the amount that we need, and we have a lot of calls and emails out to our partners to try to get some clarity around that. Usually they don't give out those amounts until April, but usually we've been able to get kind of a heads up from them, and that's what we're hoping this year too.
And this happens every year.
It does, yes.
We try to fund. We'll see what happens, but this is not unusual.
Exactly. I will say in the terms of what is unusual, if there is a substantial diminishment to our federal award for whatever reason, we would look to the state to continue stable funding at least, and really move away from that dollar for dollar requirement, and instead look at investing in the Arts Council at the need that is across the state and how we can serve it. So we hope, as I said, to have more information about that in the next couple of weeks, we think.
Okay, and if it's April, then it'll be in the Senate.
Yes, exactly.
At that point. Tom, did you have a question?
Just another thank you for the work that you bring to the state. Just want to have more of a comment. I'll leave the questions for later. And I think Wayne, you have this in your, it looks very impressive to say that that artists bring $1.2 billion to Vermont's economy, and you kind of broke it down a little bit. I also just want to state, that doesn't necessarily go all the way down to the artists themselves. And so the support that the agency is able to give to artists, how often are we asked that artists sell your CDs at the restaurant and perform for free? And, the classic response is come to my house and cook dinner for free and leave a menu. But I just want to thank you for, while you can't pay artists nearly enough from your agency's perspective, I appreciate the work that it does that then reflects into the $1.2 billion to the overall economy. The idea of what the arts brings is a little, it doesn't, like I said, doesn't go all the way down. So, thank you for your work in doing that.
Congratulations.
And if you do hear more from the feds, let me know, as I'm gonna let you know. Everybody's on.
Thank you.
I'll bring it to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
It's nice to hear from all the cultural groups. Who have we got next? Symphony Orchestra.
I was the one who had the Zoom.
Ah.
I'm trying to-
We never quite know, and it's, you can't be sneaky about it because that's what happened. That's all right. We got it figured out, so.
I was told that he was supposed to bring a fiddle.
Oh, well.
I was supposed to bring a fiddle. I'll think you bring a banjo.
Maybe the two of you could do something.
There we go.
Last week, your budget request.
So
Yeah.
so why don't you introduce yourself for the record, Lisa?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you today. My name is Elise Brunel. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Symphony Orchestra. I live in Grand Isle and I've been here since 2020. So that is my history, and I'm trying to figure out how to share my screen. I would hit share. There we go. Hold on a moment. Let me just see if I can. Not as prepared with this as I thought.
Do you have a copy of your?
No, you don't. It's, but let me just see if I can open it now. There's no, there we go. There's no information that isn't in what I've already given. It's just sort of a consolidation of it. So if you don't mind, I'll
Go ahead.
just run through this. Thank you so much. So I'm hoping you can all see this. That's your VSO, your Vermont Symphony Orchestra. We are the only statewide orchestra and chorus that operates year-round. We have altogether 54 union musicians. We have 80 volunteer chorus, 4 full-time and 2 part-time staff. That's what we are. This is a brief overlook at our mission and our strategic plan, which guides the decision-making behind what we can do to create music around the state. And just keep going a little bit here. What we do. So a little over 40 concerts a year, about 50 educational events around the state each year, altogether reaching around 20,000 people and across the state. I think Christopher mentioned earlier on talking about the economic impact. One of the key things here is that the money primarily goes back to people. We are people. This is what the money funds. And it's around 1.7 for arts practitioners. That's musicians, and that's lighting designers, and that's the tech crew guy, and that's our accountant, as well as the businesses. So I think about the lighting and sound company down in Clarendon. I think about the small newspapers up in Barton Chronicle. I think about the hotel in Barrie, a whole bunch of different businesses that we provide money to. They provide us services so that we can create great musical events around the state. Here's a quick look at where we're going to be in FY25, where we kind of cross over financial years a little bit, but the point to say that we do our very best to be as statewide as we can, everything from an 80-piece orchestra down to a trio, education as well as concerts. Here's a quick look at some education programs. Music in schools is probably our most well-known. If you've got anybody in a family who's in an elementary school, they might have seen the brass trio or woodwind trio or strings trio come in and show kids what those instruments do and how to create music with it and teach them a little bit about how it connects to some STEM principles. So we've been talking a lot about how science and music can work together. That's the Musicians in Schools program. In addition, we have a musical petting zoo where kids can play musical instruments on the summer tour. We work a lot with young composers, so kids learn how to write music for instruments. It's amazing. You think, oh, I want to learn how to write for a trumpet. Well, you should probably know how a trumpet sounds and what it can do. So a lot of the work is teaching kids what the various instruments are, and they can write music for that. We have a Juiska Box Kids Quartet. Those are for little kids learning how to explore emotions through music that tours around the state. And we also work side by side with the Vermont Youth Orchestra. That's a different organization, but they have a lot of high schoolers. They have about 300 kids, and they come and sit in with us in concerts so that we can give some of their senior level members a chance to kind of have a little professional experience before they move on. Serving the state, a couple of things that I wanted to point out. Food Shelf, every year we fundraise, we ask our audiences to bring, it's anywhere between 700 and 1,000 pounds worth of food that gets donated to local food shelves. We do free tickets throughout the year. You can see with a variety of organizations, to Orchestra for Mental Health, the Vermont National Guard. Students get free or $10 tickets. And then we also have a whole variety of free concerts during the course of the year around the state. That's a picture up in St. Johnsbury. I think we were at the Fairbanks Museum doing a concert up there focused on science and music. Partners. Couldn't do it without our partners. To me, these logos kind of show how integrated we are to be statewide. We couldn't go down to Bennington if we weren't in the museum. We couldn't create a sort of a career enhancement program for college kids in media if we weren't with Champlain College. We're doing a concert with them at Beta Technologies. We wouldn't have Holiday Pops if we weren't at Berry Opera House. So there are so many different venues, education and arts organizations that we partner with throughout the year.
Sorry, I have to go to another meeting. Rep Harrison is taking over.
All right.
You're in good hands.
Steve, I hope we have a couple of people left in your. Let me talk a little bit about budget. So it's a 3% increase from last year. So that's 154,170. That equals how much is that? Well, altogether, our tax sourced grants. So that is NEA, Arts Council, Humanities, and state is about 8% of our overall budget. We draw about 15% of our budget from our endowment, which is higher than we want. We sell 35%. Box office is around 35% of our income, which is about 10% higher than your average orchestra. Normally earned income ticket sales is around 25 to 30%. And then donations and grants.
Lisa, if you could stop here, Representative Laurel.
I can wait till she's done.
Okay. I have a question. When you say from your endowment, are you spending principal from your endowment, or are you spending the interest earned on your endowment? And how large is your endowment?
Our endowment right now is just shy of 6 million. Our fiscal policy is a 4% draw. We've been having to draw up to a 7% draw over the last couple of years as the COVID money ran out, trying to right size, an expensive organization with a lot of people in it. So I've been trying to find that additional funds to replace the COVID money that's come from our endowment. We're coming to a point next year where the board will revert to a 4% draw. So that'll be a drop of about $200,000 from our operations.
So I'm looking at the other part of the chart.
Yeah.
Talk about donations and grants.
Yes.
Where does the state grant show up? Is it in that section of the circle?
It's under the tax grants. Right. So if I look at what we get from tax sources, 150 from the state, another 40 or so from local organizations. NEA gives us $25,000, which I haven't gotten yet, even though and I don't know if I'm going to get it. That is 8% of our overall. Where my biggest concern, our box office has gone up significantly. There's a lot more people coming to buy tickets to see the shows that we do, which is great news. it's donations and grants. People are simply contributing less, especially corporates. Corporate sponsorship, which used to be a bedrock of a lot of arts and culture things, is seeing a steep decline. So that's where I'm quite worried over there.
Thank you.
Sure. If you go to expenses, artistic production, salaries and benefits, that's by and large people. Again, technicians, musicians, all of that. General operations, that's our, our office and marketing a little bit. So that's a general look at how and where we spend money. It's important for me to put us in the context of other orchestras around the state. Not around the state, there aren't other state orchestras, but nationally. It's interesting, salaries and benefits for administrative staff is generally up closer to 40% to 50%. So we are really, really lean in terms of the people who do the work. I want to spend more money paying musicians to create music and teach. And so we're really heavy on that side, which I think is the appropriate thing to do. But as any sponsored thing, whether or not that's sports, whether or not that's agriculture, arts and culture, whatever it is, it really does rely so strongly on sponsorships and support. That's us. And there we were at Castleton last summer for the first time. Added a show because there was demand to have a summer tour out there. So that's the Vermont Symphony Orchestra. And I thank you so much for your time.
Great. Representative Roche and then Representative Cosenza.
You mentioned poundage for food.
Yes.
I didn't catch it.
Sorry. So we have a holiday pops program in December. We go to Barrie, Burlington, and Rutland. And each time we do a push for our audience members to bring donations for the food shelf. We have a raffle behind that. And it generally brings in about 1,000 pounds total of food, donated food, because we figure we've got wonderful, generous audience and they always rise to that occasion. So I want to make sure we can leverage when we have a lot of people coming in the door, we leverage that to support the local community in different ways. Yeah.
As you're, also, thank you so much for your providing here for the state too. So as you're reaching out for grants here, there's a lot more competition, I suspect, for this from nonprofits. Do you have a sense of what your competition might be in terms of securing grants? Sounds like maybe some past donors maybe and therefore they're reducing
Right.
their levels of things here, but with grants in particular here.
With grants, do you mean in terms of like corporate sponsorships or foundation grants?
Foundation grants.
Foundation grants. We're finding some of them are closing. They're shutting down.
They're coming to an end.
They're just coming to an end and they're not being so replaced to other ones. Also, Vermont itself simply doesn't have as many available. So we tap into quite a lot of Vermont Community Foundation grants. I think we're the recipient of 4 of them, kind of maxed out, if you know what I mean. So, yes. So another thing, sorry, I wanted to mention in the proposal I sent through, I do my best to try to find money from outside of Vermont to bring it into Vermont. It's important to take national foundations and national corporates and try to get those dollars into this state. So.
Thank you.
With my sure.
Any other? Yes,
Just,
Representative Stevens.
again, thank you for bringing the arts around the state, the way that you have done. For so many years, as a grant maker, and if you're finding that businesses are not, or corporations are not as generous as they were in the past, have they given an indication why that is in terms, especially the larger ones, and in terms of the way wealth has been built up for corporations while individual ones there's just a way, it just strikes me as odd that there may be more wealth available at those highest of levels, those corporate givers, but are they giving more elsewhere? Do they ever tell you why they reduce their funds? I don't think that's probably the answer, but
I wish I knew. I think what we're missing is the person that will say, yes, I'll open the door for the conversation with the decision makers. So we're getting stopped. TD Bank. So for example, they used to sponsor our summer festival tour to the tune of $30,000 and they stopped. And I got the line of just, the usual wording, we're not sponsoring it again, but I'm unable to get to the person who can tell me why. And sometimes we're missing that. I don't know if they're moving that money elsewhere. But I think your question is one of our biggest ones. Why? Is it that they are moving elsewhere, they have less money? We're not sure, and I need to figure that one out. Because I don't think we haven't changed the market. They want to put their branding on something that's going to attract people to their business. I'm not worried that we can provide that. I mean, that's, again, corporate sponsorship as opposed to philanthropic. There's two different areas that we rely on. But I don't know. I have asked 3 or 4 of other like-sized nonprofits in the area and asked them about their corporate sponsorship, and they say it's either holding or going slightly down, specifically in corporate. So,
Thank you.
I commend you, Elise, for the expansion of the number of types of programs that the Vermont Symphony, whether it's the jukebox series or others, and I think that all bodes well for a bright future. Wish I could help you get there financially sometimes, but it's becoming a bigger part of the Vermont scene. So congratulations.
thank you. And I hope people bought a ticket to Grace Potter because that's sold out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Steve?
Just to preface this, his father and I were freshmen at the University of Maine in 1968 in the wildest dormitory on campus.
Are you sure you want to share that?
That's kind of a historical statement.
Yes.
Historical statement.
It's a small world. Well, we're in Vermont. So I'm Stephen Perkins. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Historical Society. I have Jennifer Blair, who is our director of finance and operations, with me. I'm going to be away for a little bit in the next few weeks. So I just wanted to introduce her in case there were any questions in the very short term that we can answer. She's also much better versed in the details of our budget if we go there. I'm going to try something today. I'll talk a little bit about the society, the budget as submitted, and then I have a short video that our staff put together this past fall that dives into our new strategic plan that will talk about our programs, what we're doing going forward, and some of the results. So it's a little bit backwards, and we'll see if technology allows me to show that video. So I'll just start off with a bit of an introduction. I know we have some new members of the committee, so I always get tapped to talk about the history of the Vermont Historical Society, but we were chartered way back in 1838. We are similar to the Arts Council and a kind of a quasi-state agency or organization. And there's a number of statutes that govern what we do and how we operate. You can find most of them in Chapter 22, and it's in the materials that we sent out, so you can look those up. Some of the salient ones that impact certainly budget construction for us and for speaking with you are the statutes that reference our employees, and that all VHS employees have to be treated as if they were state employees. Unfortunately, that is the statute, so it's a little vague. But all of our employees are classified and receive all the benefits and everything that state employees do. And then there is a separate statute saying that our employees must be part of the state pension system. So when we talk about, what are budgetary pressures on the society, a lot of them are around the personnel, and they're the exact same pressures you'll hear from the governor's office about state employees, and you can see those in the condensed budget that we submitted. So those are some of the realities of creating a budget around what we do. But what do we do? We're the State Historical Society. Vermont, we operate a museum on behalf of the state of Vermont. We were the de facto state archives for about 100 years. We hold the state's collection, and we do those in 2 locations. We do them here at the Vermont History Museum next door at the Pavilion. Please come visit. And at the Vermont History Center in Barre, which is the old Spalding High School, it's 1892, then expanded in 1904 building. Our building in Barre also houses the State Library and the office and collections of the state archaeologist. So really a kind of a great research center there. So we collect, that's one half of what we do. We have a museum, we have a large collection. We just opened a brand new research and exhibition gallery in Barre, which again, I encourage you to come take a look at, which brings more of our collections to the public, allows people to research them. And of course, an extensive research library and archive on that location as well. The museum, as I said, over here in Montpelier, we just wrapped up for the Love of Vermont, an exhibit which is being traveled by Lyman Orton at some of his personal collection of Vermont artwork. And it was a wonderful show for us to shoehorn into the little museum here in Montpelier. And we almost doubled our visitation and revenue, walk-in revenue in that location with that show. That's half of our operation. Of course, I'm glossing over lots of things, publications and journals and whatnot. The other half is our outreach and the support that we offer around the state. And that's split almost evenly between our educational programming and our support for local societies. So our educators provide programs both here in the museum in Montpelier in conjunction with the Sergeant at Arms office and the State House. And we also provide outreach, curriculum development, and programs, the biggest of which is Vermont History Day, where we have, I don't know how many we have registered this year, but close to 400 students last year participating from all over the state. And we look to see that grow, students reflecting on what history means to them. There's a theme every year, and they do everything from exhibits to speeches to websites to film. And then we send the top students down to Washington to compete in National History Day. And it's a great program for Vermont schools and for Vermont students. And we continue to see that grow every year. On the outreach side of things, we support the roughly, I'd say average 191 historical societies to be precise, that are incorporated in the state of Vermont, as well as a number of small museums. And we provide workshops, we provide an annual conference, mentorship program, part of the VACDARN organization, and that is ongoing. In fact, there is a online roundtable at lunchtime today, if you care to tune in, about presenting objects to the public, how to write a good label, how to put objects in cases. So sometimes it's really hands-on, other times it's bigger concepts like fundraising or good governance, helping them write bylaws, that sort of work. So that's the general work of what the society does. This year, our budget, the governor has recommended a 5.9% increase in the appropriation, and we're very happy with that. I think a lot driven by those personnel cost drivers that I talked about earlier. And then also to know that total number that you see, this is where it gets confusing, and we went very deep on this last year, because we maintain the museum here in Montpelier on behalf of the state, there's a state fee for service or fee for space applied to the pavilion building. That number goes up and down, usually up, every year. And so we never know what that is until the very end. The governor's office has been very good of just including whatever that number is. And but it has to be included in the appropriation to us, but it just goes back into the BPS coffer. So it's not really a lease, it's the fee for space, and it's a kind of a moving target floating number. So that's included in the appropriation. I'll pause there and answer any questions to leave time for it to try this film.
How long is the film?
6 minutes.
No questions. Just
No questions.
Just.
All right.
Are you gonna try to share it, or did you want me?
Well, it may be better if you do, and I can just shut this thing down.
Okay. I'm gonna try.
I did learn a lot about the CCC and Mendon. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Well, while we're waiting, Representative, so you can do a
I think
question.
we're ready to go.
If it totally doesn't work, we'll make sure you get the link. It's
This
link. Yeah.
This, your budget liaison is Representative
Yes.
LaRoche, and it goes, I think, also for the other folks that we heard today.
All four people.
All right.
Well,
Well, you play the banjo, so you're.
I thought I was gonna have to follow a cellist or something today, so. Yeah.
All of our activities at the Vermont Historical Society are in service to our mission. We believe that understanding the past changes lives and builds better communities. Our purpose is to engage Vermonters and Vermonters at heart with outstanding collections, statewide outreach, and dynamic programming.
VHS knows that connected communities start with the youngest Vermonter. Each year, we partner with educators to support young historians as they compete in Vermont History Day. The winners go on to compete in National History Day near our nation's capital. In the coming years, we will continue to work to expand participation in Vermont History Day to underrepresented schools and populations, centering equity of access in our efforts.
Vermont educators share our goal of helping their students learn about Vermont's history so that they will understand its place in the broader world. Our history kits and the Vermont History Explorer platform provide educators with rich curricular materials for students of all ages. We're excited to welcome hundreds of Vermont school children to the Vermont History Museum each year, almost as excited as the students are.
We are committed to access and learning for Vermonters of all ages. 2024 has been an incredibly busy year as we've been preparing to open our new open storage space at the Vermont History Center, the Research and Exhibition Gallery. This project is the culmination of years of work, and in this space, scholars of Vermont history, from the amateur to the professional, can come engage with items from our outstanding collections. The drawers, shelves, and all displays will open to everyone who wants a deeper dive into the history of our state.
We're now 4 years into a museum collections inventory, about 60% of the way to making our object collections universally digitally accessible. And we're planning for a statewide digital platform so that Vermont's treasures housed in local historical societies and museums around the state, as well as other sites, are available to all researchers everywhere.
Our local historical societies and museums are invaluable partners in preserving Vermont's history. We support their work through workshops, conferences, and guest exhibitions in our museum. As we prepare for the 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation, we are providing grants for our local historical societies so that they can mark the semi-quincentennial in their towns.
To build connected communities, VHS needs to go out into the community. For our annual program, Vermont Eats, we partner with community groups and invite participants to experience the history of Vermont's immigrants and an age-old way of building community, breaking bread. Vermont Eats celebrates how immigrants have enriched our economic, civic, and cultural lives and our culinary experiences.
Becoming a member of Vermont Historical Society means you are part of our work. You are joining our community of people committed to preserving and exploring Vermont's rich history. You may use your free admission to the museum and the library, or log on to our virtual programs, or attend in-person events. However you access our resources, by becoming a member, you have prioritized preserving Vermont's history and providing access to our collections.
The Vermont History Museum in Montpelier welcomes thousands of visitors each year. Guests from all around the country and the world get an overview of Vermont's history, in addition to our in-depth rotating exhibits. Whether you are from Washington County or Washington State, from Springfield, Vermont, or one of the other 66 Springfields across the United States, Visiting the Vermont History Museum connects you to our work and makes you a Vermonter at heart.
Through sharing collective stories, Vermonters of all ages and locations increase their knowledge of our state's complex past and inform our present. Our volunteers, members, partners, visitors, scholars, educators, and students are all a part of our work. Each day, we strive to understand how our unique experiences impact and shape this ongoing narrative.
A little jumpy. If you want to watch it more smoothly, you can watch the link to get an idea.
From the early 20th century.
Yes,
Put in black and white.
great. Committee, any other questions?
Looks like you got the last catamount over there mounted.
We do. Well, there are some who say no, but we have the last document. Last known. Yeah. Last known.
That was the one in Barnard, was it?
Yep.
Natural death?
No. Most of them weren't, unfortunately. Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for taking the time. I know the schedule is a little crunch. Last year we had the luxury of spending a Monday afternoon and having our own private cello. But we really appreciated that, but time being what it is, and we're a little bit pressed. So thank you all. If there are any questions, follow-up questions, we'll go through Representative LaRoche and get back to you for answers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, we're going to break for lunch. We're back at 1 o'clock, and I think we have
See you administration.